Al Jazeera's investigative unit is in the Caribbean to expose a corrupt trade and how that funds elections. Dominica's Prime Minister has just announced the date of their next election.
It's Friday, the 6th of December, 2019.
Our investigation reveals how the sale of diplomatic passports helps keep politicians in power.
Oh, it's the definition of corruption. Corruption 101A.
We don't use the word bribe. We'll just use the word a token of appreciation.
We show how a former prime minister acted as a broker in a secret deal.
My question is, what's next for me? How much? About 50,000?
The current prime ministers of Dominica and Grenada are said to have been paid by wealthy foreigners wanting to be diplomats, something they strongly deny.
Today, as I understand it, it's 250,000. Unless you're hot, really hot, then the price will go to over $1 million.
You know what $1 million US can do? That alone could finance a whole election.
We ask why some ambassadors to the United Nations don't meet the UN's own standard on who should be a diplomat.
I find it outrageous that the UN accepts these appointments.
And we reveal how an Iranian, now serving 20 years in jail, helped pay for an election in return for a title.
I couldn't call him Ali anymore. He said, no, you're going to call me Excellency.
July 2019. Our investigative team is in Panama to meet Oliver Serafin. He's a former Prime Minister of Dominica.
What's going on? Good to see you, man.
He's just had meetings in Dominica, hoping to set up a secret deal, the corrupt sale of a diplomatic passport. He doesn't know our undercover team is filming.
So I made the rounds. So I got the who is the real closest to the Prime Minister. In addition to him, we're all good friends. And he's now a confidant and the closest person to the PM.
Serafin thinks our undercover reporter is a middleman for a wealthy European businessman living in Asia. He's willing to pay to become Dominica's ambassador to the Philippines and entitled to a diplomatic passport.
There's no ambassador in the Philippines for Dominica. So that possibility of getting our friend in there is very good.
Only Dominica's Prime Minister, Roosevelt Skerrit, could make that appointment. After 15 years in power and 3 election wins, he's now campaigning in a 4th election. Serafin says he's already heard from a contact that Prime Minister Skerrit would expect to be paid.
So he's not talking about the Prime Minister, but this guy actually picked up $500,000 US and from a couple of friends of his for the diplomatic position. So Skerrit is in the business of raising some huge amounts of money for himself.
Three months earlier, we're in Dominica for Carnival Week. The election could be called any time in the next year, and the floats already echo early campaigning. One band stands out. There's free booze on offer. They're the only float with a police escort. The band's patron is Prime Minister Skerrit's wife. Not all the floats seem pro-government. Several belt out a calypso that's a direct attack on the Prime Minister. The lyrics refer to a scandal involving the Prime Minister, a criminal on the run, and a diplomatic passport. Al Jazeera can now reveal the full story, which has never been told, although widely joked about. My Dominica Trade House was a venture started in 2014, not in Dominica, but half a world away. It was set up in Malaysia to promote links between the two countries. The man behind My Dominica Trade House was neither Dominican nor Malaysian, but Iranian, Ali Reza Monfared.
Ali's a very flamboyant person. It's like a magnet. You know, he has this way of pulling people to him to show him this is richness, this is power, this is how you can succeed.
Manoj Bular and his wife Kiran have never spoken before about what they witnessed firsthand. Bular's a Malaysian businessman recruited by Ali Monfared to run My Dominica Trade House in Kuala Lumpur. He says they organised lavish promotions, attended by senior Dominican politicians who expected gifts.
Yeah, lots of Montblanc pens, wallets, leatherware, Cartier watches, jewelries. We had 10 bars of gold, 100 grams each, printed up with My Dominica Trade House stamped on it.
How much was the value of each of those bars?
10, 15,000.
After 6 months of hosting several Dominican delegations, Monfared welcomed Dominica's Prime Minister, Roosevelt Skerrit, to Malaysia. He came with a present for Ali Monfared.
Ali received his diplomatic passport through the hands of the Prime Minister personally when he came down to Kuala Lumpur. He had a big, lavish party, and he announced, he said, I just got my passport. The Prime Minister just gave me my passport.
An Iranian, Ali Monfared, was now Dominica's ambassador to Malaysia.
He was a high in cloud nine, like he was saying that he was a king, His Excellency, call him Excellency.
I couldn't call him Ali anymore. He said, no, you're going to call me Excellency.
The rules of diplomatic relations were laid down by the United Nations in the Vienna Convention. Ambassadors can live tax-free in the country they're appointed to. Diplomatic bags can't be opened. Their homes and embassies can't be searched. And ambassadors are normally immune from arrest. Monfared quickly exploits that. At the My Dominica Trade House office in Kuala Lumpur, a rowdy party leads to a police raid.
20 cops came out and they went straight to the office. Ali locked himself behind the office door. And all he did was showed his diplomatic passport and said, I'm a diplomat. And that's when the police just walked away.
The Bulars say they paid for the house, which became Monfared's home and the Dominican embassy.
We had a lake right behind his house, ordered 1,500 ducks, macaw, parrots, making a racket. Neighbors were complaining. It is a prime, prestigious estate.
Monfared throws a house party and quizzes other ambassadors on the perks of his new job.
Ali would ask him what immunity, what protection, what benefits can you carry cash? Will your bags be checked?
We've obtained a secretly recorded conversation from the party. It's between the then Jordanian ambassador and Ali Monfared.
If they want to do any action plan or something, there is any cover-up through to the diplomatic passport. Do we need any security for the diplomats?
The moment you present your credentials,
yes,
you are immune.
No one can touch.
There is immunity for especially the ambassadors. They cannot arrest you. They cannot come to your house because your house, our embassy, is property of the Commonwealth of the Dominican.
I think it's completely wrong to have a conversation about the perks.
These are guarantees that you can conduct your business on behalf of a nation state without being interfered with.
Mark Stevens is an expert on diplomatic law.
Being an ambassador is somebody who represents at the highest levels and with the highest levels of probity and integrity their country and their country's interests. Invariably, that person is a citizen and a national, a domicile of the country who appoints them.
But our investigation has found dozens of examples of Caribbean governments appointing foreigners as their diplomats around the world.
Time and again, we find that these small countries, often after bribes are paid, will qualify people with no connection, no experience, but who are international criminals or who need, for some dubious reason, the protection, the shield of diplomatic immunity. And they buy it, which is a scandal, an international scandal.
Jeffrey Robertson was involved when the abuse of diplomatic passports first became known. He acted for the wife of a wealthy Saudi. She sued her husband for a divorce settlement in the British courts. But Walid Jafali didn't want to pay.
So how do you get out of a law that everyone else has to obey? Very simple. Sailed off to St. Lucia. And lo and behold, in no time, he was made the ambassador to the International Maritime Organization. And he never turned up. For 2 years, he never turned up. And yet, when his wife properly made an application for money, he claimed immunity, diplomatic immunity as a shield. Now, that was obviously outrageous.
A British court eventually agreed with his former wife. Diplomatic immunity didn't apply in a civil divorce case. Criminal immunity only applies in the country an ambassador is appointed to. Iranian Ali Monfared didn't know that when he thought a diplomatic passport was the answer to all his problems. Those problems began on the Malaysian island of Labuan in 2012, 18 months before Monfared set up My Dominica Trade House. Manoj Bular's family ran a shipping business in Labuan. Ali Monfared contacted him, claiming to be an agent for the Iranian government, wanting his help.
Iran being in the sanction, they had problems in moving the oil. And I specialize in marine logistics.
Manoj Bular's solution to international sanctions on selling Iranian oil was to disguise where it came from.
Ships would come in from Iran, loaded up with oil. We'd have empty tankers parked outside. The mothership would come alongside our tankers. They would discharge the oil onto our storage facilities. The oil would be stored out in the sea for months at times. We wait for winter to come in China because the price goes up. And then the sister ship would come along our side, our tankers. It's a direct route straight to China. It will be in China within 14 days.
After a year, it became known China was buying Iranian oil, so they closed down the operation. What Manoj Bular didn't know was Monfared was skimming off the profits, stealing from his own Iranian government. By 2014, they were after him. As an Iranian citizen, he was vulnerable to arrest. He needed another passport.
Monfared would not leave his house. He was so scared. Any phone call would come, he would jump. Any knock on the door, slowly it materialized. Why? And the way he had to find another citizenship.
It's called citizenship by investment, and it's a major source of income for Caribbean and European countries. It's legal, but controversial. Wealthy families from Asia, the Middle East, and Russia invest around $250,000 in luxury resorts or a government scheme. In return, they get citizenship and a new passport, which allows visa-free travel to many countries. Monfred took Manoj Bullar with him to Dominica to buy a passport through citizenship by investment. To help Monfred's case, Bullar primed him with other investment ideas for the island. Officials were so impressed, they suggested a meeting with Prime Minister Skerritt.
I went down for 2 days. I was in a casual mode, in my shorts and t-shirt. I had to borrow a shirt and a pants from the front desk, get myself prepared since I was going to be meeting the Prime Minister.
Manoj Bullar says he did most of the talking, and Roosevelt Skerritt immediately made him an offer. Not the kind of passport given to foreign investors, but an upgrade to a diplomatic passport. A conversation Skerritt says he doesn't remember.
Why don't you be our ambassador at large? Straight away there.
A formal ambassadorship?
Straight away, ambassador at large. I declined. And I said, nah, I'm a businessman, not a politician. Monfred turned around and said to me, he said, are you out of your mind? An opportunity like this and you declined it.
Did Monfred say to you why he wanted the diplomatic passport?
Definitely. He said, I get diplomatic immunity completely. I don't have to be worried about the Iranians.
We're investigating whether a former Dominican Prime Minister can broker a deal to make our candidate Dominica's ambassador in the Philippines, and what it will cost.
We're talking in the region for about 400,000. That's what I think would make a fund seal a deal. Yeah.
Oliver Serafin confirms diplomatic passports can be bought, even by criminals.
I consider Skerritt really Houdini of tribal politics. Yeah. He's made some potentially disastrous mistakes. Appointments of ambassadors has created a furor of accusations of those persons having been under international scrutiny and are guilty of all kinds of crimes. Yeah. Like money laundering, this, that, and the other.
Those include Inglap Seng. While a diplomat for Dominica, he bribed UN officials, now jailed in America. Italian Francesco Corallo gambling tycoon, designated a UN ambassador, awaiting trial for fraud after being on Interpol's most wanted list.
Is this going to be, like, announced publicly, or is this? No. Okay.
Can be.
Yeah, can I be?
My question is, what's next for me? So that will come up.
Yeah.
So what's 50 would be good for me?
How much?
About 50,000.
50,000.
Yeah.
In a perfect world, it would be really nice to do this diplomatic passport stuff and have the money go to the right place, you know?
I hear you. It doesn't work out that way, unfortunately. Yeah?
Our investigation also takes us to Grenada. Prime Minister Keith Mitchell has been in power for most of the last 25 years. His diplomatic choices don't seem to conform to the spirit of the Vienna Convention, that ambassadors should be nationals of the country and full-time diplomats. Many of Grenada's ambassadors are foreigners with business links to the island, although there's no suggestion these diplomats paid for their appointments. Oleg Feira runs an internet firm in Miami, while Grenada's ambassador to Moscow. Hamza Al-Kholi heads a global company, while a UNESCO ambassador in Paris. Naguib Sawiris designated Grenada's ambassador to France, but never accepted by the French. Sawiris is one of Egypt's richest men. He owns the luxury silver sands on Grenada's premier beach. He's now building phase 2 further along the bay. Locals fear expansion into the adjoining Camahone Park, the last strip of public land leading to the sea.
Young children love to come play in the sand. The park is our access way to the beach. Camahone Park is a part of me. It's a part of my life, my childhood life. And really, it's one of our national assets, and we deserve to have this park.
We can have a situation that's happened in many countries where all the lovely sites were taken up with commercial development. The residents have become second-class citizens, and there is nowhere for them to really enjoy anymore.
Their fears were reinforced in 2017 when a draft resolution to protect Camahone Park from redevelopment was rewritten by the government.
Instead of having the park as a place for us to enjoy in perpetuity, they rewarded it to say that all attempts should be made to facilitate the investor's expansion of his project. So this is worrying when the government would go to that end.
There's no evidence Naguib Sawiris paid Prime Minister Mitchell for his title. By contrast, an American conman says he did pay for his ambassadorship.
Eric Resteiner is a serial fraudster who, for a spell, operated in the Caribbean.
David Marchant runs the financial crime database Offshore Alert, which investigated Eric Resteiner.
Why would he want a diplomatic passport?
When you operate like Resteiner does, you either know you're under investigation or you know that you will be under investigation at any given time. So it provides a level of security.
Offshore Alert claimed Resteiner promised Prime Minister Mitchell $1 million, handing over half at a Swiss villa, with a plan to ensure he wasn't double-crossed.
His former head of security told me that he secretly recorded video and audio, Resteiner giving a briefcase with $500,000 of cash in $100 bills to Keith Mitchell. After it was secretly recorded, Resteiner told the head of security that if he tries to with me, I've got him by the balls.
And the head of security then put all of this down into some form of legal document, is that right?
He swore an affidavit, and I was given a copy of that.
The Americans jailed Resteiner for fraud in 2006 and confiscated the tape without making it public. A judicial inquiry accepted Prime Minister Mitchell's explanation. He did receive cash, but only $15,000 for travel expenses.
Keith Mitchell just wants to enrich himself at the expense of the people who voted him into power, and it's disgusting. It's disgraceful.
You know what $1 million can do in an election? That alone could finance a whole election.
George Warm publishes the New Today paper in Grenada. He says his sources confirm the sale of diplomatic passports has helped Keith Mitchell stay in power.
There is a gentleman. He was a government agent. He was like the middleman in establishing the communication between these individuals and the government. And he was telling me the kind of prices that these diplomatic passports and other official positions. But when you're talking about the diplomatic passports, it was going for $1 million EC.
And if $1 million was paid, where did that money go?
Into personal pocket. These are the monies that the politicians would then use to service their constituency. So when the people say we want a fridge, we want a stove, that's where the money is coming from.
number of times I've had people approach me asking whether I could get a diplomatic passport because they know I hang around with all the prime ministers.
Leo Ford has spent years doing business in both Grenada and Dominica.
For the prime ministers, I would suggest that the trade in diplomatic passports is the most lucrative endeavor. First time I had heard about this was 15 years or so ago. Then the price was $25,000. Then it went to $50,000. Today, as I understand it, it's $250,000. Unless you're hot, really hot, then the price will go to over $1 million.
Hot as in what?
Criminal activities, indictments, it happens.
So the more desperate you are for the immunity, the more the price goes up.
Exactly.
All right, you see the sign?
Yep. The sign was for a project in Grenada also linked to an ambassador role.
Yep. So GSA was the project, and then Across, they were the people who were bringing the money in.
Yeah. What would have been here and what is here now is totally different.
The site was meant to be an organic shrimp farm, a government-approved project for foreigners to invest in and gain citizenship.
They spoke about a lot of jobs, you know, for this area. All in all, I feel like a real disaster for the country. You know, that didn't go on.
Carl David was working for the man who initiated the project, Leo Ford.
So we would have employed 100 folks in the area that had the highest unemployment rate on the island. So there had to be something going on in the island where they needed a big rah-rah for the election, because the election was coming up.
Plans for the shrimp farm were announced by Grenada's Prime Minister.
I'd like to invite to the podium the Prime Minister of Grenada, Dr. the Right Honorable Keith Mitchell.
I'm so proud of what we've seen here this afternoon, and I look forward to it, to see this project take off in every sense.
The PM, as we were walking out of that, I said, I'll build it, but I'm going to need your help for the approval process. And that's when the Prime Minister said, well, the election's coming up. We take campaign contributions, talk to my ministers.
How did you interpret that comment?
That means they wanted a lot of money to make everything go ahead quickly.
Soren Daoudi, a Swedish national, was the partner who raised the project funding. Both Leo Ford and a colleague say Daoudi told them he was offered an ambassador role.
Soren was talking with his attorney, and his attorney, who's very well connected with one of the ministers, convinced him that he could become an ambassador for the UAE from Grenada.
How did he seem to feel about this?
He was like a little kid in a candy store. He went out and bought himself a pair of $800 or $900 shoes. In the ground opening, it had rained and it was muddy, and he's traipsing through in these beautiful, fancy shoes.
A year later, Keith Mitchell won his 5th term in power, but neither the ambassadorship or the shrimp farm ever materialized. Soren Daoudi denied he'd been offered an ambassadorship and called it a vendetta by Leo Ford. He also denied the money raised was missing. That's now the subject of an investigation by the Grenada government. Keith Mitchell said all the allegations about him were false and came from political activists wanting to tarnish his name and hurt Grenada. It's our second meeting with Oliver Serafin, who says he can broker a deal to buy a Dominican ambassadorship. He's already named the price and his cut.
400, 200 now, 200. I get mine.
You get your 50. So is that 350,000 or is that 450? 450.
He gets 400.
Okay.
I get 50.
Okay.
He says the 400,000 will go to Dominica's Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit, a secret slush fund to help win the next election, expected within months.
On the reality of normal things, he would lose. But he has a master plan to bring Dominicans who are in the old islands, like in Antigua, St. Thomas, and so on.
Fly them in.
Fly them in to vote.
Okay.
You know, so that he has the numbers. So He did it before. He offered a trip to Dominica, all expenses paid. He may just pull it off. His level of generosity to the public that he's trying to get the votes from is extraordinary. And they get 2,000, 5,000, 10,000, EC dollars, $40,000, $30,000, whatever it is that they need to repair their book, or to send them to some medical. And he does that outside of the treasury. Put it this way, he's substantially affluent. He's in the millions. Nobody knows, but he's worth a lot.
Skerritt denies any corruption or illegality. In Dominica, he's building a new home. His family also had a base in New York, across the river from the United Nations. But is the apartment linked to a secret deal for a diplomatic passport? The evidence for that starts with Diezani Alison Madueke, who was Nigeria's Minister of Petroleum Resources.
Every Nigerian will be touched by the rewards and the proceeds from the oil and gas sector.
4 years later, her last day in office, she's facing allegations she looted billions of dollars of oil revenue for herself and corrupt associates. The week before, in London, she's personally handed a Dominica diplomatic passport by Prime Minister Skerritt. A passport which could shield her from criminal charges. We found documents showing a few days later a shell company forms in Delaware, an American state where laws mean the true owners of the company are kept secret. 4 months later, that shell company buys the New York apartment for $2.2 million with no mortgage. Property records confirm the Prime Minister's wife, Melissa, was a resident. Photos place the Skerritt family there. Both Diezani Alison Madueke and Roosevelt Skerritt strongly denied any link to the company that bought the apartment. Roosevelt Skerritt said the family resided there due to a kind gesture by an unnamed friend of his wife. He strongly denied any wrongdoing and didn't ask or receive any money from Alison Madueke. In Dominica, we've also tracked the money trail, linking Prime Minister Skerritt to another doubtful diplomat, Iranian Ali Monfared.
Among the documents that we've got are a series of emails about sending money from Malaysia to Dominica, and specifically to a petrol station in the town of Portsmouth.
It's owned by the Nanthan family. Emmanuel Nanthan was among senior politicians who visited Malaysia when Monfared opened My Dominica Trade House there. He was also key to the upgrade to a diplomatic passport.
After it materialized that Ali was supposed to get his diplomatic passport, a sum of money, a token of appreciation, as we say, was to be given. Nanthan offered to use his company. And then he said, well, I've got petrol service station. Send the money through that.
Within weeks of the trading house opening in Malaysia, Nanthan is phoning and emailing from Dominica, chasing money.
He's saying that the Prime Minister is waiting. The Prime Minister is inquiring. That basically goes to show that Nanthan was actually being the middleman, doing all the dirty works for the Prime Minister.
Bank documents show $200,000 is then paid into the account of Nanthan's service station.
Were you under any doubt that this was a bribe for the diplomatic passport?
Obviously. We don't use the word bribe. We'll just use the word a token of appreciation. But definitely, without that money, Ali would not have got his diplomatic passport.
The My Dominica Trade House opens in 2014, the year of Dominica's last election. Documents confirm a rally by Prime Minister Skerrit's ruling party with entertainers and fireworks is paid for by the Malaysian trading house, as are thousands of party T-shirts.
They kept saying that it is very expensive for them to import T-shirts into Dominica and have it printed. And we said, yeah, we can get it done printed here in Malaysia and we can ship it out to you. And then agreed to have something like 5,000 T-shirts printed out.
The bill for printing the party's manifesto is also paid by the Malaysian company. 2 months later, Prime Minister Skerrit wins a third term of office. Days after that, Iranian Ali Monfared sends his voluminous thanks and appreciation to Skerrit for making him an ambassador. Nanthan then asks about arrangements for the Prime Minister's visit to Malaysia.
His trip to be paid for onward towards China, private jet hire, hotels, shopping money. The staff informed me that Ali has withdrawn 100,000 from the company's account for the expenses of the Prime Minister to be used in China.
Emmanuel Nanthan denied receiving any gifts. Both he and Roosevelt Skerrit called the payments entirely lawful campaign contributions and denied any wrongdoing. Nanthan didn't explain why they were paid to his family's service station.
Hungry hyenas. They were just out, not for the interest of the country. I've seen corruption. A lot of corruption I've seen in my life, in my business. But this is way ahead. Corruption to the point where the interest is only 90% personal and 10% to the country.
Sundays with George Grant. Every day we do Good Day Grenada. On Thursday nights we do this program.
In Grenada, George Grant's online show is discussing the growing controversy over diplomatic appointments made by Grenada's Prime Minister, Keith Mitchell.
I mean, it's just embarrassing right now to take a look and see what's going on out here. The people are aware of what is happening.
The online panel attracts listeners around the region and the Caribbean expat community worldwide.
We have had some people appointed diplomats who have fallen into some dark areas where the law is concerned overseas.
This kind of activity totally devalues and mocks in the notion of diplomat.
They're especially angry that many Caribbean governments refuse to reveal the names of foreigners appointed ambassador.
This is a long list. The opposition leader asked for a full disclosure on who are our diplomats. The foreign minister, an attorney herself, says it is not in the public interest to disclose the full list of diplomats.
I think we're going to have to take a little break now. Once we got into the segment about the diplomatic passports, all hell broke loose. Of course, this comes as absolutely no surprise to you folks. People have seen this happen over and over again.
Just tell me what's happened. Somebody actually tried to stop the program.
It's called throttling. They squeeze the bandwidth so that there's a lot of buffering.
So, just to be clear, this has happened to you before, every time you do
Oh,
something?
umpteen times. Umpteen times. Anytime you're discussing something that pinches a political nerve, look out. They're not going to squash it because we're going to leak out there anyway. But they're going to make it a living hell. Are you going to sit and watch something that goes... makes you question this thing you call democracy?
The Grenada government denies any technical interference. The list of diplomatic passport holders is secret in several Caribbean states. Antigua and Barbuda have published their list. There's no suggestion of illegality or bribes, but again, questions about who's become a diplomat. Movie star Robert De Niro was given the honor for attracting investment and celebrities to the islands. Muhdar al-Assad is a nephew of the Syrian president. His links to Antigua are unknown. A third economic envoy is Colombian Alex Saab Moran. We've seen confidential police documents outlining a multinational investigation into Moran, and financial documents showing huge amounts into 2 Antiguan bank accounts. They're from his companies for a food program for Venezuelans. Food boxes, many rotten and infested with beetles. Antigua's Prime Minister, Gaston Brown, defended Moran's diplomatic appointment. Only when the US indicted Moran for money laundering unconnected to Antigua did Gaston Brown revoke his friend's diplomatic passport. Brown didn't respond to our request for comment.
Situation of the weather is so terrible that right now it's bombarding for the 100 miles per hour. So it has been a bad day in terms of weather, but all else is well.
After 3 months trying to arrange the sale of a diplomatic passport, Oliver Serafin sends voice messages saying he's met Dominica's Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit.
What I have concluded is that the Prime Minister, we have had our moments and so on, but he is very distracted.
It's hurricane season, and Dominica is gearing up for an election. Serafin says the Prime Minister can't risk any more diplomatic disasters.
There's been some revelations about persons who were given diplomatic passports who have been imprisoned.
Dominica's former ambassador to Malaysia is sentenced to 20 years in jail by a Tehran court.
اتهام زیبا حالت منفرد رو کلاهبرداری به صورت شبکه‌ای با تأسیس بیش از 10 شرکت سوری.
Ali Reza Monfared lost diplomatic immunity when he traveled outside Malaysia and was arrested by the Iranians.
The Prime Minister has been having a string of very disappointing appointments, including the former Minister of Petroleum from Nigeria.
Diezani Alison Madweki, appointed Dominica's Trade Commissioner, has $40 million worth of jewellery confiscated as the Nigerian government investigate her for fraud.
Everything is in the hands of the Prime Minister now. They would rather deal with this matter after the elections are called. It's not a negative at all. It is about timing.
Another breaking scandal involves a current Dominican ambassador to the United Nations in New York.
I'm Ambassador Paolo Zampolli, and welcome to my birthday party.
Fashion TV covers Paolo Zampoli's parties. The footage reflects his varied roles: diplomat, real estate broker, and former model agent.
Happy birthday to you. It's always a pleasure.
Happy birthday, Paolo! Paolo Zampoli is an ambassador for both Dominica and Grenada. His social media showcases his friends in high places. Very high places. He once worked for President Trump and supposedly introduced Melania to her future husband. Zampoli escorted Trump when the president addressed the United Nations. Ambassador Zampoli is also linked to a new resort in Dominica, funded through the Citizenship by Investment scheme. In a legal dispute, he claims investors from countries covered by US and UN sanctions have bought citizenship. The developers deny that, but the charge also suggests the Dominican government didn't do the required checks on who's eligible for a passport. Prime Minister Skerrit denies that, But it's still politically embarrassing coming from one of the many foreigners who are already his ambassadors.
The climate right now has exacerbated into the extent of fear and apprehension that no mistake can be made in any appointment, particularly at this crucial pre-election time.
We've found around a dozen UN ambassadors who, like Paolo Zampoli, are not nationals of the Caribbean states that appointed them. Once again, there's no suggestion of any illegality, just more questions about who should be a diplomat. Billionaire Wafiq Said is a former ambassador to UNESCO in Paris for St. Vincent. Tycoon Gilbert Chaguri is also UNESCO ambassador for St. Lucia. A Swiss court once convicted him of money laundering. Brazilian model Amanda Ungaro made a UN ambassador for Grenada.
Happy birthday, Paolo. I love you.
Amanda Ungaro is also Paolo Zampoli's wife.
I'm a former UN appeal judge, and I find it outrageous that the UN accepts these appointments. It hates challenging the actions of member states. Member states don't like it. But in the case of these fake diplomats, I think for its own reputation, it must.
Paolo Zampoli told us he and his wife were assets who'd brought investment to the islands. Grenada told us his wife, Amanda Ungaro, is no longer a UN ambassador. Our undercover investigation into buying an ambassadorship in Dominica takes an unexpected and dramatic turn.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dominica.
Oliver Serafin, Dominica's ex-prime minister, says the outcome of the forthcoming election is too close to call. He says if we offer the opposition party a donation, they'd appoint our candidate an ambassador if they win. He tells us to call the opposition party's lawyer.
Hi, David Bruni speaking. The opposition leader.
Okay.
And continue to advise. Through me, there's easy access to him.
Okay. Can you say you're speaking on his behalf, David?
Yes, I can say that.
Lennox Linton, the opposition leader, could become the next prime minister within weeks.
The opposition now really requires funding. Make no mistake, we are moving along, but as in all things, financial contributions are required.
Bruni stressed our candidate for ambassador would have to be of good character and help develop Dominica's economy.
I just wanted to be clear that you were aware of the conversations that OJ had been having with my representative in Panama?
Oh, yes. OJ is a trusted confidant, definitely. I'm very comfortable with him, and the leader of the party is very comfortable with me.
He's trusted. So what OJ had to say, you're 100% happy with all of that. That's
100%. Absolutely 100%.
Bruni then drafted a document stating that within 28 days of Lennox Linton becoming prime minister, he'd appoint our man ambassador at large. There's no mention of campaign donations.
I would suggest that the Panama dollar matter, they prefer not to discuss it on the phone. They believe that there are lots of hackers and so on.
Serafin means the payment agreed in Panama to buy a diplomatic passport.
Okay, but I'll figure out, we're talking in the region of about 400,000.
Both Bruni and Serafin appear keen to avoid the direct involvement of the opposition leader, who's campaigning on a platform of anti-corruption.
The gentleman prefers to create a buffer because he does not want to be implicated at that stage.
The vital interests of the people come first at all times.
The request will be that the first 50% of the Panama Agreement will be what is expected at this time. The funds are needed very urgently, T-shirts and vehicle space systems and various supplies.
Serafin sends bank account details for his $50,000 fee and $20,000 for lawyer David Bruni, who he says will also handle money for the opposition.
Amounts that could be assisting the leader can come through his account. The funds will be declared as humanitarian donations for Dominica.
We've obtained a second document signed by both opposition leader Linton and his lawyer. That also promises an ambassadorship to another foreign national if the opposition win the election. Early November 2019, and Prime Minister Skerritt finally announces the date.
Elections in the Commonwealth of Dominica is Friday, the 6th of December 2019.
5 more years. 5 more years.
Roosevelt Skerritt strongly denies speaking to Oliver Serafin about an ambassadorship, calling his comments totally false. Skerritt says he's suing Lennox Linton for making similar statements. Serafin says he was speaking without authority, name-dropping to impress. Lennox Linton said he knew nothing about Serafin's conversations with Bruni and would never exchange an ambassadorship or passport for money. David Bruni didn't reply to our queries. The end of Carnival in Dominica is marked by a symbolic funeral. This year's winning Calypso is all about corruption paying for power. As our investigation shows, that's not limited to any one party or one nation.
The money controllers in the country, fire upon them, fire upon them.
Any regime putting up diplomatic status for sale is morally bankrupt.
Architects of the people's poverty, fire upon them, fire upon them. Businessmen.
It's a whole business to give immunity and protection to crooks and criminals.
It's a business where countries keep their list of diplomats from their own people.
The ambassador is supposed to be representing the country. Is that supposed to be secret? Secret Asian ambassador. It's like, you gotta be kidding me.
So no secret society, no political party go by me.